Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to, as always, an impromptu video. I hope everybody had a nice, pleasant, serene, productive, or whatever weekend, and I hope everybody's got started into their weeks with some marbles still remaining on board and with relative sanity and calmness and all the rest of it. I'm doing all right, thank you very much. Had a bit of a quiet weekend, nothing really to write home about. I can't really complain. I could, of course, but as I always keep saying, what would be the bloody point? In this brief video, I wanted to just sort of highlight one or two things that I've been talking about very recently with a couple of friends, having been at the last Flat Earth Social in Ferndown, in the Bridge House Hotel in Ferndown last Tuesday. One of the topics that invariably comes up is the topic of old world constructions, because they are amongst us, or we are amongst them. They are all around us. We don't really notice them until you start realizing they're there and the significance of them. And then, of course, you have that white car syndrome where you can't fail but to see them all the time. And I just thought I would address this topic as I haven't done for a while. And whilst I prefer to go out and actually look at these things in person, hands-on experience and all that, because they are all, as far as I'm concerned, awe-inspiring. I have a huge respect for a lot of these, all of these buildings. They are vast, not just in size, but in aura. There is something quite remarkably massive about all these constructions that go beyond the materials they're made of or the dimensions. But anyway, I digress. Here is something I came across whilst I was doing a little bit of paperwork, and they were sort of a couple of people on this program were viewing a little village in an area of England called the Cotswolds. It's a beautiful area. I've been there lots of times. Anybody gets the chance to go and visit there, do. It is remarkable. It's like you're in a living museum, basically, when you're there. Gorgeous countryside, amazing buildings everywhere you look. And you, of course, stumble across a lot of buildings like this. This one is in a little village, town, village, hamlet, whatever you want to call it, called Stow-on-the-Wold, which is in the Cotswolds. This church is called St. Edward's, and its claim to fame, there's a couple of claims to fame. First of all, the bass guitarist of The Who, Entwistle, was buried here, laid to rest here in 2002. But also it was used to inspire, allegedly, Tolkien with his Lord of the Rings books. This entry in particular of the church seemed to have played a significant part in some of his thinking. While we're talking about that, excuse the reach round, but here are a couple of things that I like to sort of talk about when I talk about old world buildings. And I also, at the same time, while I talk about it, I'm, getting my head around the topic as well, because I don't think you ever really can. Because, let's face it, we don't have time machines. We can't go back in time. We can't actually, 100% for sure say what happened. We can only kind of draw conclusions based on the evidence that's left for us to look at and evaluate, if you like. But here, on this church entrance here, you can see something that I talk about a lot, and this is depicted very well on this picture here. This is what I'd like to call stabilizing walls. You have a lot of these sort of wallets that come out the sides of the building. And, when you look at the construction itself, the church itself, any church, right? But as we're talking about this one, let's just stick with this one. You'll see a lot of these stabilizing walls attached to the church all around it. Now, some churches have lots of these and some have not as many, but they all have them, right? Now, bearing in mind these churches aren't very big. This is a medieval, so-called medieval church dating back to the sort of 10th century or whatever, Normans, right? According to our history books. I'll get back to that in a second. But, these are barely 2 stories tall. and that's including the spire or the steeple or whatever's on the top. In this case, it's got like I think personally they've taken the spire off, and you're left with a sort of the castle turret look, right? Of which you have plenty of churches and cathedrals, and even things like the Houses of Parliament in London. They have that sort of feature, don't they, where it looks like castle turrets. But anyway, they're not tall enough from this ground level upwards to warrant these stabilizing walls, right? And these little walls here, they're barely taller than the entrance, as you can see, right? So this, for me, is one of the huge giveaways, in case people are not too sure, to the fact that these buildings go way deeper in the ground. You'll have to imagine this ground not being here, right? Then these stabilizing walls would make perfect sense, because you would need them to keep the main construction upright, to stabilize, if you like. Now, bearing in mind, we build buildings way taller than two-story churches now, today, with lesser materials, cheaper materials, and we don't need stabilizing walls at all. A relatively deep foundation will do the trick, or, laced with steel, of course. Yeah. But that's about as far as we go. We don't need these on the sides going all around the body of the building, yet with far more superior materials, far sturdier constructions, amazing architecture that clearly have stood the test of time, right? They required, nevertheless, these stabilizing walls. And you wouldn't if this is all you had, a bit of church above the ground as we see it today, right? So my contention is that these churches do go way deep down in the ground, and in principle, all you're doing is you're seeing the tops of these buildings, bearing in mind they were never built as churches in the first place, right? So there's the first point, and I think it's highlighted very well here with this bit here showing next to the entry, which is my second point. And though I'm not an expert of trees and all the rest of it, I'd be barking up the wrong topic there. But I would say that these trees, whilst they're not 50 years old, they're also not 1,000 years old. And of course, they would have began to grow when this ground was this height, right? I mean, you can see the roots already here. Now, that means that this level was here from the moment that these trees were planted, if you like. So let's just call it, for argument's sake, 200 years max, right? So another giveaway that all this, the trees, the ground level here that you're seeing, came at a later date after this main building was constructed. And if that's not enough to convince people that there's something not quite jiving here with the timeline, the trees and the church and all the rest of it, then all you have to do, and this is the case in every single church that I've seen. Now, I've not seen every single church on earth, but every church that I've visited over the last few years where I've paid attention to this topic, they all have somewhere along the wall, either around here or around the other side, there'll be like a bit of a trench, and there'll be stairs going down deep into the ground. We all know that of crypts in churches, right? But yeah, you have this feature where there are stairs going down the side of the building and then into a side entrance that's subterranean, right? And what they've done there, I say they loosely, but what has happened there is that the ground clearly has been pulled back to create that trench, to then be able to access the building below level, right? They wouldn't have to clear it all the way around the church, just the part of the side of it will do, because you're not putting living quarters in there where somebody needs a view or anything like that through a window that's subterranean, which doesn't make sense either. But nevertheless, there are loads of buildings around that have windows below street level. You have to ask yourself why that is. But yeah, so clearly that's all you would need to then be able to access the building below ground. But here, I've never been to this church, so I can't say for sure. Of course not. But every single church I have been to up to now, or cathedral or anything of the sort, even town halls, that sort of thing, large majestic buildings, let's say, they all have like a side entrance where stairs go down quite steep to access the floor. And then when you do get down below, and I have been down below in a few of these places, you're standing on concrete slabs, which means they've even, you know what I mean, they've even covered the flooring there because it goes even deeper down. So you can presume, and I know it's a presumption, but you can assume that these buildings are at least the height that you see lower below the ground. Bearing in mind these stabilizing walls have absolutely no use for just this little bit. They don't need stabilizing. This building definitely does not need stabilizing with little wallets like this dotted around it at this height. Definitely not. Right? Nothing shifts this, really. Nothing would shift it. You know, you could have a hurricane whistle through here and it wouldn't move this church. It's made of solid rock, stone, brickwork, whatever. You know, there'll be a lot of facading. Ironically, this stuff here that you're seeing over the so-called door entrances and also the rims around the windows that you often see with the same sort of arched features. If you go up close to them, you can give it a try. Try it in your local church. Try not to get caught by the priest, of course. But you go up there and use your finger and thumb and just rub against it, and you can crumble at it. You can crumble away at it. And then you have to think to yourself, well, obviously, if the whole church was made of that material, then there wouldn't be much left of this after the amount of time. They are old buildings, by the way, but they just don't jive with the history books, is what I'm saying. Right? Now, getting to this one, this dates back to the 10th, 11th century, allegedly. So we're talking Norman conquest, right? That's when a bunch of geezers came over from France in wooden boats wearing skirts and flip-flops, armed with a sword or two, maybe even the odd hat. Came over, popped over, fought a few battles, and then decided to knock up lots of churches, priories the sizes of cathedrals, etc., etc., introduce a language, a culture, and all the rest of it. Quite astounding, quite remarkable, absolutely amazing. I mean, that, you know, I thought the Romans were clever, but the Normans were pretty nifty themselves, actually. I mean, never mind the Vikings, they managed it in big rowing boats. But anyway, and they'd crossed large bodies of water like the Atlantic, allegedly. But yeah, so you have a lot of these buildings that stood the test of time. They're made of very, very solid, I've gone off on a tangent there, but made of very solid materials. A lot of the time, this will be facading, and the core of the building itself will actually be brickwork, red bricks, to be precise. And as we know, according to even local logged history, although there were brickyards around in the mid-1800s, brick factories didn't exist until 1885. They are the official facts according to the history books that our children get at school to read and consume and take on board as knowledge, irrefutable knowledge, right? They're the same books where it said we walked on the moon as well. And I know the moon is made of cheese, right? So, you know, so when I talk about questioning everything, I don't try and be pedantic, but it's basically, you know, we have a lot of glaring things in front of us where you have to sort of just give it a second look and think about it. Now, you could say, well, who really cares how old these churches really are? Well, it's the bigger picture, you see, that I'm interested in, because quite clearly, you know, we're being lied to on an absolute mammoth scale. Now, I'm not saying I'm here to try and figure out why the lie, because we're never going to figure that out. And who cares, to be frank, why the lie? But it's enough to understand that the lie does exist, right? That the narrative when it comes to these old world buildings are absolutely untrue, which means that totally puts into question our history, right? So anything predating the 1800s, you can pretty much forget. And I say that because there was something called the Victorian Restoration, and that all happened in the 1900s, which is the 18th century. No, sorry, 19th century, which is the 1800s, right? The Victorian Restoration was a thing. It happened parallel to the revolution, the Industrial Revolution, right? Where basically, you know, during the reign of Queen Victoria, and I mentioned this in the talk that I gave in the Flat Earth Social, the last but one, when I spoke about how Victoria for me has a way bigger significance than the royalty aspect or the fact that she was Queen of England. I think it's the significance of the word Victoria, what it actually means, the fact that it sort of, it marks the invocation of an era post reset, which I think happened end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s. The first thing you would then do is restore, refurbish, bring up to standard the buildings that you've repossessed, right? And then in the history books it says founded. Well, all you have to do is drop the E and the D on the end of that word, and then you're really nearer the truth, I think. And then when you dig a little bit deeper, you can look up organizations like Odd Fellows and who they were affiliated with, and what their role was and all the rest of it. And of course it is a bit of a rabbit hole, don't get me wrong, but it's certainly an indication, the fact that, basically everything you learn about what you think you know about your own history, including your family's history, will be true to a point. But then after that, forget it. That's the conclusion I've come to based on the research I've done over the past few years surrounding this topic. But it continues because it fascinates the heck out of me, to think that we're more walking literally amongst this stuff, and we don't realize that we're walking on ground that actually is covering the majority of the buildings we see above it, of this, ilk, of this kind of style or whatever, church-esque buildings, town hall type buildings, and all that sort of stuff, buildings that are used for universities like Oxford, Cambridge and whatnot. If you go there and just look at these old buildings, right, there is evidence that half of those buildings at least are underground everywhere you look, everywhere, right? So the Victorian Restoration is definitely a key element to what we see today. That's not a figment of my imagination. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is what we observe. Okay, I just thought I would bring that to you. I hope that was of interest. I quite liked, the idea of breaking that down a little bit and doing that more often now, hopefully, even though it's approaching the winter time, but it doesn't stop people from getting out and having a little look. If they're interested in the topic, you will find this stuff everywhere, in every village and town throughout the country. I guarantee you that. Okay, right, so on that note, thank you for listening in, and I will see you all soon, some of you sooner. Until then, take it easy, and ta-ta for now.